Hello, and thank you for your time today. Myself and the members of the Ethical Consulting Gators are eager to present our findings concerning the presented case. Our team is comprised of myself, Dorian Simpkins, Devin Katz, Sebastian Carson, and Chloe Johnson. We are of the opinion that CFAs should be held to a standard higher than those laid out in the CFA Standards of Practice Handbook. While it is important to draw specific guidance from this handbook, as we will do in this presentation, we will also emphasize the importance of instilling ethical principles into each decision that CFAs such as Buck Walter make. The CFA handbook sets the standard, but our expectations for moral decision-making exceed just these standards. We want to ensure that finance professionals ethically put client investment interests over their own. Therefore, our goal is to utilize the CFA Standards of Practice Handbook and business ethic frameworks to explain what ethical missteps Walter made and advise how to use ethical due diligence to prevent finance professionals from repeating these actions. To do so, we will begin by identifying key factors in the scenario. Then we will consider situational influences. Next, we will make recommended actions based on ethical alternatives. And finally, we will reflect on these ethical changes.
I will be going over an analysis of the situation. First, he based his actions on a juicy tweet. Next, he trusted social media as research. Then he acted based on multiple suspicions based on that research was really just his gut feeling. He then handled his personal transactions before his clients, as in he dumped his shares before his client's shares. He didn't discuss this with another CFA, and then he failed to communicate this with his clients. So what did he do that was unethical per the CFA handbook? First, he violated standard 3A, loyalty, prudence, and care. He failed to act with reasonable care and exercise prudent judgment or place client interests over his own. As in, this sort of encompasses everything. He didn't do enough research on this. He just blindly went ahead and acted based on his own intuition and off that tweet. And then he unloaded his shares before he unloaded his client's shares. So he put himself before his clients. The portion regarding around due diligence and not doing your research and just basing off of intuition is also violates standard 5A, diligence and reasonable bias. And then the other portion where he placed his client's interest above his own violates standard 6B, priority of transactions. Now let's take a look at the more macro problems with this ethically beyond the CFA handbook. First of all, there's huge financial implications and reputation consequences for clients and the companies. It's 5 million shares, what Walter did, so it's not going to move the stock price very much, but it's going to jeopardize the company's reputation if this decision does not play out, because they have a CFA person who just goes off of his own feeling. He doesn't go off of research. As well, something that is super important is trust in a CFA client relationship. And how could a client ever trust the CFA holder if he or she did something like this? So that violates that relationship and responsibility.
Moving on to consider. There are a number of stakeholders that we must consider in this case. Internal stakeholders include Walter's clients, BANKGLOBAL, Walter's employer, and the BANKGLOBAL executives. External stakeholders include Walter's fellow CFAs, the capital markets as a whole, and NextFly Inc. investors. There are also a number of situational influences. There's the perceived time constraint. Walter felt that he must act quickly in order to sell the shares that he and his clients had before the CEO sold his, and that caused the stock price to fall. There's also the overlap of personal and professional interests. Both Walter and his clients had shares of NextFly. And finally, there's the apparent majority agreement. Most Twitter commenters said that the CEO should sell his shares. This may have contributed to Walter's decision.
Now that we know what ethical missteps occurred and the factors contributing to them, we know what preventive actions to take. And to correct each of these handbook violations one by one, we recommend taking 3 main steps. Strengthen reporting requirements, communicate standards for due diligence, and execute regular client reviews. One such reporting requirement that would have prevented Walter from selling his own shares first would be if his personal transactions were duplicated by his broker and then reported to his firm, in this case, BANKGLOBAL. That would allow BANKGLOBAL to verify the timing of Walter's transactions, and by increasing visibility, reduce the likelihood of unethical behavior. Walter also exhibited poor judgment in his over-reliance on Brett's tweet in his decision to sell. Decision-making criteria should be trustworthy and supported by other evidence, and we need to set that expectation now. One way to accomplish this goal is by giving bonuses not just based on portfolio performance, but by the rationale behind the investments. And that leads us into our last recommendation, which is to ensure regular client meetings. It's important to increase communication between the CFA and the client, because in that way, we're ensuring the CFA standard of loyalty, prudence, and care. While I would love to give Walter the benefit of the doubt, it's not clear how much care he took on a case-by-case basis with his clients. We know that he sold 5 million shares across the board, but clients have different levels of risk tolerance and diversification thresholds and financial goals. So I would hope that Walter did something like at least modify the amount of stock he sold for each client. And with all these actions we're recommending here, this is an example of how BANKGLOBAL could go about implementing it over the next year. Immediately, BANKGLOBAL could take steps like require pre-clearance for personal transactions with a conflict of interest, ask CFAs to report their investment rationale, and also ask CFAs to touch points with clients one way or another. But as we go about throughout the year, these recommendations are going to steadily transform BANKGLOBAL's culture into one of model integrity. So over time, we're going to implement bigger changes, some of our more long-term recommendations, such as writing out written standards and guidance for due diligence, and eventually even partnering with brokers so that we can get their personal transaction records, and even aligning compensation arrangements for BANKGLOBAL executives. And once all these recommendations are implemented, we're going to be able to better prevent future unethical behavior and protect the reputation of CFAs across the board. So let's see, as we wrap up with the action section of our recommendations, let's see how this would play out in a client walkthrough. So currently, Walter saw the tweet, he immediately decided to sell after it, didn't tell his clients. Imagine that the NextFly CEO decided not to sell his tweets. Walter's thesis was wrong, and the stock actually climbed. Now, Walter is going to get calls from confused and angry clients on why their portfolio didn't increase as well. And they're going to find out that he actually decided to sell their shares a while ago based on, again, a tweet. Now imagine if Walter does additional research based on BANKGLOBAL's specific investment methodology. He may still decide to sell, which is totally fine, as long as he then proactively communicates the portfolio updates to his clients. Right now, he's doing it possibly reactively to clients, and it's important to proactively ensure and communicate these significant changes in a portfolio. Even if Walter's thesis was still wrong, this is now a very different narrative. Before, Walter's potentially breaching the trust his clients have in him, but now, since he was transparent at every step and put their interests ahead of his own, clients can believe that Walter has their best interests at heart. And this way, he hasn't lost the business and breached the trust that people have in Walter, BANKGLOBAL, and the CFAs, just as some of the stakeholders Chloe mentioned in her section. And it's for these reasons that these recommendations need to be implemented to ensure a more ethical culture and protect the reputation of CFAs.
And now, in reflection, we want to emphasize that there is nothing inherently wrong with looking into information from a tweet, but it must be done with the proper diligence and collection of information as well as ample communication. Our main effort in making our recommendations placed importance on prioritizing the clients, and we are confident that establishing clear ethical guidelines for CFAs will be conducive to ethical decision-making. Thank you.